In the previous video, we learned about slots. We created the card component which contains a slot in the template. This allowed us to send arbitrary content from the parent app component. Although this works great, sometimes you might find it useful to have multiple slots. By doing so, you still have some predefined structure in the child component. But the content within that predefined structure can still be controlled from the parent component. This will also reduce the code you write if you have to utilize the component in multiple places. A very good example is a layout component, which is definitely applicable to our card component as well. In this video, let's understand how to add multiple slots to our card component. So, back in VS Code, in card.svelte, let's add some structure to our card component. Our card should contain a header, a content, and a footer. So let's add 3 div tags with an ID that represents the section. A card header section, a card content section, and a card footer section. For each of the 3 sections, we want the HTML to be controlled by the parent. So we need a slot again. Let's add one each inside the 3 div tags. But now we have 3 slots. Svelte will not know which slot the content has to be placed in. So when we have multiple slots, we need to specify a name for each of the slots. For the card header slot, let's add name is equal to header. For card content slot, name is equal to content. And for the footer slot, name is equal to footer. For the content slot, you could specify a fallback content if you want to. Now let's go back to app component and fill in the new slots begin with the card component. Within the opening and closing tags, we specify the content to be placed in each of the slots. And the way to do that is using the slot attribute. So add a div tag and the slot attribute which will contain the name of the slot it has to replace. First we have the header slot, so a div tag and a slot is going to be equal to header. As the actual content that goes into a child component, let's simply add an s3 tag that says header. Next, let's add a div tag for the content slot. So div tag, the name of the slot is content, and for the actual content, let's add an image. Finally, let's add the footer content. So the tag slot is equal to footer, and as the footer content, let's add a button that says view details. Again, this is just to demonstrate multiple slots, so you can add any HTML that you want to. If you now save the file and take a look at the browser, you can see a card component with a header, content, and a footer. Our multiple slots card component is working as expected. This card doesn't justify a practical card component, but in real-world application you can consider the header having a background and font color, the footer being right aligned to place the action button, and so on. Another possible use case is a model component. You would have a model header, model content, and a model footer. The layout is fixed, but what goes within each of the sections in the layout can be controlled from the parent component by specifying slots in the model component. One more feature Svelte provides related to named slots is the ability to check if the slots has been defined by the parent component. Let's say, just before the footer slot we have a horizontal line. In the browser we can see the separation, but it might so happen that another card component might not really need the card footer. So in m.svelte, if I remove the footer content and head to the browser, we still have the horizontal separation. But that was only necessary if the footer slot was defined. To fix this, we can conditionally render the slot in the card component. We achieve that using $sign slots, which is a special object provided by Svelte. The object contains slot names defined by the parent which we can use to conditionally render the slot in the child. So for the footer slot, we are going to use an if block, so #if. The special object is $sign slots and we check if the footer is present. The horizontal rule of course will now be within this if block. After the div tag close the if block, you are basically asking Svelte to render the footer slot only if the parent is defining the footer slot in the markup. If you now head back to the browser, the horizontal rule doesn't show up and our card component looks much better. So that is about named slots and the $sign slots objects, which comes in handy, and there is one final detail left about slots that we need to learn. Let's do that in the next video.